In today's episode, we are going to look at the 6 most dumb Karen deaths ever recorded. From a Karen making a huge fire in the kitchen after ignoring instructions, to a Karen ignoring police and driving with her car in a dangerous situation no one dared to enter. It was March 18, 2016, at a suburban shopping center in central Ohio, where weekend shoppers move between floors beneath glass ceilings. Zelda Quigg, 41, worked in an office environment and had a habit of ignoring posted safety rules when she believed they were unnecessary. She navigated the busy corridors, pushing a metal grocery cart with her 6-year-old child seated comfortably inside, having filled it with their weekly shopping haul, weighing approximately 40 pounds. Approaching the downward escalator leading to the parking level, Zelda encountered prominent yellow warning signs prohibiting shopping carts and strollers on the moving stairs. The signs clearly directed customers with wheeled items to use the elevator located just 30 feet away, where other shoppers were already using the alternative route. A middle-aged woman nearby noticed Zelda positioning her loaded cart at the escalator entrance and warned her, pointing to the posted signs and gesturing toward the nearby elevator. Zelda waved off the concern and continued forward, appearing annoyed by the interruption and confident that the rules did not apply to her. As Zelda attempted to guide the cart onto the moving steps, the front wheels initially rolled onto the first step successfully. Within seconds, however, the rear wheels caught firmly against the metal comb plate at the escalator entrance. This mechanical resistance caused the heavy cart to twist violently sideways across the full width of the moving staircase. The sudden rotation threw her child forward from their seated position, sending them tumbling onto the escalator steps below. Zelda instinctively lunged forward to help, but the twisted cart now created an unstable barrier. She fell chest first across the metal frame, her upper body striking the cart's edge with considerable force. The escalator's downward motion kept pressing the twisted cart forward, driving Zelda's upper body against the side panel as the steps continued to move beneath her. Her head and chest were pinned briefly between the cart's metal frame and the escalator side panel, while her body was dragged several steps before the motion could be stopped. Witnesses later reported that her head struck the metal edge of the escalator housing during the struggle. Nearby shoppers stood frozen momentarily, in shock before anyone reacted. After approximately 7 seconds, multiple witnesses rushed to activate the emergency stop button, bringing the escalator to an abrupt halt. By the time the escalator stopped, Zelda was slumped across the cart and not responding to those calling her name, showing only shallow, irregular breathing. Emergency medical responders arrived within minutes, working carefully to extract both victims from the escalator mechanism. Paramedics immediately assessed Zelda's condition, but could detect no signs of life. She was pronounced dead at the scene despite their efforts. Security personnel cordoned off the area while investigators documented the scene. The subsequent medical examination determined that Zelda had suffered severe blunt force trauma to the head and upper chest, along with crushing injuries caused by being pinned against the escalator structure. The medical examiner concluded that the combination of head impact and chest compression led to rapid loss of consciousness and cardiac arrest. Her child survived the fall with only minor injuries, requiring basic medical treatment at a nearby hospital. Mall security provided surveillance footage that clearly documented the entire sequence of events from multiple angles. Local authorities confirmed that the escalator had been operating normally and that all emergency stop systems functioned as designed when activated by witnesses. The final investigation concluded that the fatality resulted directly from equipment misuse, despite clearly posted safety guidelines and the immediate availability of safe alternatives. It was October 14th, 2018, when a quiet evening in a modest home in southern Indiana ended in a fatal kitchen accident. Outside, autumn temperatures had begun to drop, but inside the single-story house, dinner preparations were underway beneath warm, overhead lighting. The kitchen contained aging appliances that had been in regular use for years, including an older model stovetop pressure cooker stored beneath the counter. Marla Kinsey was 44 and worked in local delivery services, spending long days driving neighborhood routes and meeting strict deadlines. According to co-workers and family members, she was known for an assertive personality and a strong belief that experience outweighed written instructions. Investigators later noted that she had a documented history of dismissing manufacturer safety guidelines and treating warning labels as unnecessary precautions. That evening, she prepared to use the pressure cooker to finish a meal. Her husband had earlier noticed hardened food residue accumulating around the appliance's pressure release valve and suggested that it be cleaned before the next use. Records later showed that the instruction manual, which outlined regular valve maintenance and lid locking procedures, had never been opened since the appliance was purchased 2 years earlier. According to investigators, Marla refused assistance and attempted to secure the lid herself after it failed to seat normally against the rim. Instead of stopping to inspect the obstruction, she applied additional force until the locking mechanism engaged. Multiple warning labels on the cooker indicated that improper sealing and blocked venting systems could cause dangerous pressure buildup, but those warnings were ignored. She then activated the burner and increased the heat to maximum. Within minutes, internal temperature began climbing rapidly inside the sealed chamber. Later, examination showed that hardened residue had obstructed both the primary and secondary pressure release systems, preventing normal venting. With no functional escape path, pressure rose far beyond the cooker's design limits. The aluminum vessel expanded as internal force increased. Stress fractures formed around the lid locking assembly, which had already been weakened by improper seating. As the cooker continued heating, the locking ring began to deform under the mounting load. Investigators determined that Marla had leaned directly over the cooker, attempting to inspect the lid as pressure continued to rise. Moments later, the locking mechanism failed completely. The lid separated from the vessel and launched upward with explosive force, propelled by compressed steam and boiling contents. The metal lid struck her face and skull at close range, delivering massive blunt force trauma. She collapsed beside the stovetop as superheated steam vented violently into the kitchen. Family members immediately contacted emergency services. Paramedics arrived to find extensive head injuries incompatible with survival. Marla was pronounced dead at the scene. A subsequent investigation found no mechanical defect in the appliance itself. The coroner ruled the cause of death as catastrophic blunt force head trauma resulting from a pressure cooker lid becoming a high-velocity projectile. Inspectors documented multiple safety violations, including a clogged vent system, forced closure of the lid, and operation at excessive heat levels despite clear warning labels. The final report concluded that the accident was entirely preventable. Proper cleaning of the pressure release valve, adherence to manufacturer instructions, and use of standard operating procedures would have prevented pressure from reaching lethal levels. The incident was classified as a fatal user error explosion caused by willful disregard of basic appliance safety protocols. It was February 2nd, 2018, when an overcast afternoon settled over a loading dock behind a mid-sized shopping plaza in central Ohio, where slick asphalt and steady drizzle slowed delivery operations. Sophia Dre, a 47-year-old resident coordinator at the neighboring apartment complex, had spent the last 8 years managing various tenant relations and facility access issues across properties in the region. Known among building staff for her domineering attitude and tendency to bypass established procedures when she deemed them inconvenient, Sophia approached situations with the confidence of someone who believed her status as a long-term resident trumped posted regulations. She had received multiple written notices from property management regarding unauthorized access to restricted areas, but had never faced serious consequences. That afternoon, she was attempting to retrieve a designer handbag she had accidentally discarded into the commercial waste compactor before the scheduled evening pickup. The standard retrieval protocol involved contacting maintenance staff who held keys to the compactor's access panel and lockout controls. However, the large industrial compactor sat with its top-loading door propped open, the machine's motor humming in standby mode. The unit had been left accessible during an interrupted maintenance check, with the operator having stepped away temporarily. The control key remained in the panel, as was common practice during active service intervals. Rather than waiting for maintenance to return, Sophia made a calculated decision to retrieve the item herself. She approached the compactor and, ignoring the prominent warning decals about unauthorized access, positioned a nearby plastic milk crate against the unit's side. Using this as a step, she hoisted herself up and over the 4-foot metal rim, lowering herself into the compactor's chamber. The interior space measured approximately 6 feet deep, with vertical steel walls and a flat compression plate currently retracted at the top position. A maintenance worker returning with supplies called out a warning, but Sophia dismissed the concern with an irritated response. As Sophia bent down, searching through the compressed refuse pile, her weight shifted against the interior wall. This triggered the pressure-sensitive safety mechanism, but the system had been temporarily bypassed during the maintenance procedure. The compactor's automated cycle, still armed from its previous operational setting, interpreted the pressure change as a signal to resume the compression sequence. The massive steel plate, weighing over 800 pounds, began its motorized descent from the top of the chamber. The electric motor's steady hum blended with the ambient noise of delivery trucks and ventilation systems throughout the service corridor. Sophia realized the danger as the plate descended, but the smooth vertical walls offered no handholds for escape. The opening remained 4 feet above, now impossible to reach. The compression plate continued its programmed cycle, designed to compact waste into dense blocks. The sustained pressure compressed her body against the accumulated refuse and the chamber floor. The mechanical force continued through its full programmed compression cycle as the automated system completed its sequence. A delivery driver discovered the situation when noticing Sophia's shoes visible at the base of the compactor chamber. Emergency responders arrived within 11 minutes, but Sophia was found unresponsive. The compactor was immediately shut down and the plate reversed, but revival attempts were unsuccessful. The county coroner's examination determined the cause of death as crush asphyxia, resulting from sustained compression of the thoracic cavity. The official incident report documented Sophia's unauthorized entry into the restricted equipment, noting that standard safety protocols required contacting maintenance staff rather than personal retrieval attempts. The compactor showed no mechanical malfunction, operating exactly as designed. Property safety investigators concluded that proper adherence to posted procedures would have prevented the incident entirely. It was November 6, 2017, at a busy rail crossing in Newark, New Jersey, where residential streets met active freight tracks and weekday commuters gathered during the height of the morning rush. 29-year-old Sloan Mercer worked in retail management, supervising staff at a downtown clothing store. Known for her impatience and confrontational approach to obstacles, she was running late for her opening shift that Tuesday morning. She hurried along crowded sidewalks toward the crossing, aware that arriving late meant delaying store operations and explaining herself to supervisors who expected strict punctuality. The crossing arms had already descended across the roadway, red warning lights flashing in synchronized patterns. The familiar sound of train horns echoed through the urban landscape as the approaching locomotive announced its presence to anyone within hearing distance. Safety protocols were functioning exactly as designed, creating multiple layers of warning for pedestrians and vehicles. Other pedestrians gathered at the intersection, accepting the inevitable delay that comes with urban rail transportation. The crossing barriers created a clear physical boundary, supported by posted warning signs and active audio-visual alerts. Standard safety equipment had been recently inspected and certified by transportation authorities. Several witnesses later reported observing her pacing impatiently and muttering angrily while waiting behind the lowered barrier. Sloan observed the scene with growing frustration. Her confrontational nature emerged as she calculated the time being lost to her morning schedule. Rather than wait with the other pedestrians, she made the decision to circumvent the safety barriers and attempt to cross the active rail line before the approaching train reached the intersection. She stepped around the lowered crossing arm and began sprinting across the multiple sets of tracks. The distance appeared manageable, and her pace seemed adequate for clearing the rails before the locomotive arrived. However, halfway across the crossing, her foot caught in the flangeway gap between the rail and the pavement, a narrow groove that guides train wheels through the crossing. The unexpected obstacle caused her to stumble forward, losing her balance and falling directly into the path of the oncoming train. The locomotive struck her midsection with devastating force, the impact causing catastrophic blunt force injuries. The massive weight and momentum of the freight train made survival impossible from the moment of contact. The locomotive operator immediately applied emergency braking procedures, bringing the train to a stop approximately a quarter-mile down the track. Emergency responders arrived within minutes of the impact, but Sloan was pronounced dead at the scene. The severity of the injuries left no possibility for medical intervention. Transportation authorities conducted a thorough investigation of the incident. Their official report confirmed that all safety systems had been functioning properly at the time of the collision. The crossing arms, warning lights, and audio signals had activated according to standard protocols. The locomotive operator had followed all required safety procedures, including the sounding of warning horns at appropriate distances from the crossing. Multiple pedestrian witnesses provided consistent accounts confirming the victim had deliberately bypassed the active safety barriers. Security camera footage from nearby businesses corroborated witness statements about the sequence of events. The final report documented that the victim had deliberately bypassed active safety barriers and entered the rail crossing against clearly posted warnings and visible safety equipment. It was May 9th, 2015, inside a small neighborhood hair salon in Phoenix, Arizona, where weekend clients filled the chairs and hood dryers hummed beneath warm afternoon light. Lana Wexler was 38 and worked part-time in an administrative office, known among co-workers for her impatience with delays and disregard for routine instructions when she felt rushed or inconvenienced. That afternoon, she had called ahead, requesting a last-minute appointment before an evening social gathering, anxious to finish quickly and leave on time. After her styling session, the stylist guided her beneath an older industrial hood dryer and instructed her to remain seated while the cooling cycle completed. Lana checked her phone repeatedly, growing restless as minutes passed and the machine continued running behind her. The salon remained busy around her. Another client sat quietly beneath a similar dryer, following standard protocol without issue. Staff moved between stations, trimming, rinsing, and styling as usual. The equipment around the room operated normally, filling the space with steady mechanical noise and circulating warm air. The hood dryer above Lana's chair was an older model, awaiting replacement parts. Investigators would later note that the rear ventilation guard had been removed weeks earlier after damage was discovered, leaving the intake opening partially exposed. Warning labels remained visible on the housing, cautioning users to remain stationary while the unit operated. Against the stylist's instructions, Lana rose abruptly from the chair while the dryer continued running at full speed. Her long hair, only loosely secured, fell free around her shoulders as she stood. As she straightened, several strands brushed against the exposed intake opening and were immediately pulled inward by the rotating fan assembly. The motor continued operating normally, drawing more hair into the internal mechanism. Lana instinctively turned toward the sudden pulling sensation, but the movement only fed additional strands into the compromised intake. Within seconds, tension built rapidly as her hair wrapped tightly around the spinning blades. Feeling the escalating force on her scalp, she attempted to step backward. Instead, the trapped strands drew her head violently upward toward the intake opening as the rotating mechanism continued winding her hair inward. Her face and neck were pulled against the rigid housing of the dryer as the machine maintained constant speed. Her neck hyperextended sharply under the mechanical traction, forcing her head into an unnatural position while the motor continued pulling. Within moments, the sustained force dislocated her upper cervical spine and caused catastrophic injury to the brainstem and spinal cord. When staff finally cut power to the unit, her body collapsed to the floor beneath the dryer, completely unresponsive, while her hair remained tightly trapped inside the intake mechanism. Emergency services were called immediately. Responders arrived within minutes and found Lana unresponsive with obvious signs of severe head and neck trauma. No resuscitation attempts were successful. She was pronounced dead at the scene. The medical examiner later determined the cause of death as a high cervical spine dislocation with fatal brainstem and spinal cord injury caused by mechanical traction from the entangled hair. The injury was consistent with sudden hyperextension under sustained pulling force. Investigators found the dryer had been operating normally, but the missing rear ventilation guard left the intake opening unprotected. The final report concluded that the death resulted from deferred maintenance and improper use, noting that either repairing the guard or remaining seated would have prevented the fatal entanglement entirely. It was April 29, 2017, when heavy spring storms flooded rural Texas, sending muddy water 2 feet deep across a remote low-water crossing as dark clouds lingered overhead. Diane Vance, a 52-year-old logistics worker, sat behind the wheel of her sedan. Known for her stubborn streak and tendency to challenge authority, Diane had chosen this back road as a shortcut home from weekend errands. The main highway would have added 15 minutes to her journey, and her impatience had grown throughout the day. A sheriff's deputy had positioned his patrol car near the crossing, directing drivers to turn around. The officer had spent the afternoon warning motorists about the dangerous conditions. When Diane approached, the deputy stepped forward and gestured for her to stop. The officer explained that the crossing was impassable and pointed toward the detour signs. Several other vehicles had already turned around after receiving similar warnings. Diane appeared to acknowledge the warning, but remained in her vehicle. After the deputy walked back toward other approaching cars, Diane suddenly accelerated around the displaced barricade and entered the flowing water. Her decision defied both common sense and direct police instruction. The deputy immediately began radioing for additional units. The sedan immediately lost traction on the slick concrete surface. The lateral current caught the vehicle's undercarriage and began pushing it sideways across the roadway. Within seconds, the car had rotated 90 degrees and was sliding toward a deep drainage channel that paralleled the crossing. The vehicle's momentum carried it over the channel's edge. As it tumbled down the embankment, the sedan rolled completely over, landing roof down in the rushing water. The impact shattered most of the windows. Water flooded the inverted passenger compartment rapidly through the broken glass. Emergency lights from the deputy's patrol car reflected off the churning surface. The current continued pushing the overturned vehicle downstream. The car came to rest against a concrete culvert approximately 50 yards from the crossing. Debris from upstream, tree branches, fence posts, and plastic containers accumulated against the wreckage, further pinning it in place. The rain intensified as emergency personnel began arriving at the scene. The deputy radioed for help and waded into the shallows, but the overturned sedan had been swept beyond reach. Swift water teams arrived 20 minutes later and found the car lodged against the drainage structure. Divers worked in near-zero visibility, feeling their way through the submerged wreckage. The water temperature had dropped with the storm, and the current made every movement difficult. They removed Diane from the flooded driver's seat. She was unresponsive and could not be revived despite immediate resuscitation attempts on the muddy bank. The county coroner later determined that Diane had died from drowning. The official incident report documented that the crossing had been properly marked as hazardous and that multiple warnings had been issued to drivers. Investigators found no mechanical defects with the vehicle and concluded that the death resulted from an unauthorized attempt to cross floodwaters despite clear warnings from law enforcement. Witnesses reported that Diane had seemed agitated before ignoring the deputy's instructions. The incident served as another reminder of flash flood dangers during severe weather events. Thanks for watching. Want to see more? Click on your screen now